Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our first breakout session for today's Let's Learn Live Summit, Working Virtually in GP. As a reminder for anyone who just joined us, we started the call by putting everyone on mute, so if you have any questions during today's presentation, please use the question box on the upper right-hand side of the screen to ask any questions that may come up. At the end, we'll have time for a Q&A with our presenter. If you are interested in submitting for CPE credit for attending this session, please be sure to complete the survey at the end of the broadcast. This survey will be available once the session ends. Finally, we are recording the session and we'll be sending a link of the recording to all attendees within an hour after the webcast. Please refer to the handout section to download a copy of the slides. Now I'm excited to introduce your presenter, Marie Rogers. Marie is a senior implementation consultant at Columbus, based out of Houston, Texas. She will be with Columbus for 10 years in July. She started working with Great Plains in 1995 as a consultant. In addition to working with all of the core modules, including GP workflow, she has implemented fixed assets, analytical accounting, multi-entity management modules, as well as writing financial reports in Management Reporter. On the technical side, Marie has installed, migrated, and upgraded many versions, starting with version 4. So without further ado, Marie, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Alexis. I appreciate it. So we're going to go ahead and get started with working virtually with GP today. So let's get going. Here are the topics for today. We're going to talk about EFT for payables with emailing the remittances. We'll talk about document attachments, workflow approvals, and secure AP check printing. And then lastly, we'll have some Q&A. So these are all of the topics that and modules that you can use to work virtually, especially in this particular situation where a lot of people are working from home. So on the first slide here, why use EFT for payables? There's a lot of different reasons. In general, there's savings. There's no check stock, no postage. It's secure. The paper checks are subjected to fraud. It's fast. It's speedy. No delays with email or with mail, with snail mail. And vendors prefer EFT payments so they can get their payments faster. And then again, mainly working remotely due to COVID-19 has caused a lot of people to find different ways of working. And let's go over how it works. With EFT in Great Plains for payables, the way that it works is you enter the invoice into GP using transaction entry like you normally would. You'd build your payment batch using the EFT option in the batch setup. Then you would process your payments in the EFT batch just like you would processing checks. You go through the same steps. And then at that point, if you have the email remittance set up, emails will be sent with a copy of the remittance. And then you can generate an EFT file is the last step. And then you can update, basically send the file to the bank however you want to use it. A lot of times the banks have portals where you can upload them, or if there's some automated options with some FTP sites as well. So that's kind of the steps and how it works. And then I wanted to kind of talk to you about how to get started. One of the things that you need to keep in mind is, talking to the bank, finding out what format does your bank accept. Typical formats for the US are NACHA CCD format, is a NACHA CCD format. GP can also produce NACHA PPD, PPD Plus, and CCD Plus. So PPD is mainly for personal accounts, where CCD is more commercial. And then the Plus files will send the vendor invoice information in addition to the payment information. There's additional formats available for international type bank formats. So as you see here in this next slide, under financial cards EFT file format, there's a lot of different options that you can kind of scroll through and see what options that you would use on an international format. So the next thing I would recommend is you reach out to your vendors and start talking to them about using EFT functionality. Not a lot of people use the letters, or maybe you do, but in purchasing, there's a write letter feature that's always been there for a really long time. And inside there's some EFT authorization letters that are already pre-configured. So you can modify this format and kind of make it more of your own. And along with that, there's an agreement or basically a pre-configured form that you can use and make changes to it, obviously, Fabricam and such. You can change the verbiage in here through the letter maintenance. Let me go back one. So when you prepare a letter, you can prepare a default vendor letter that's here, and these are all the different letters that are out there. And then you can also go into letter maintenance and make some changes to the format of the letter itself, as well as the form that's used with the authorization for the direct deposit. So this kind of will get you started, and you can basically create these letters and create a form of your own and create these. It'll do basically like a mail merge with Word documents, and it'll create Word documents that you can then save and email to your vendors, get them signed up. Once you've gotten all that information back from your vendors, and you need to start putting that data into Great Plains, you would need to update the vendor using the purchasing cards vendor address, and you're going to want to use the remit to address that you use in your transactions. So that's what drives the EFT, is the actual remit to address that you use with your transactions. So when you click this little globe here next to the remit to address ID, it will you'll be able to go in and choose the email address, or fill in the email address for that vendor. You can do a to CC BCC for these vendors. So this world icon opens up this window, and you can fill all that in. When you use when you press the EFT button on the window above, or this window, sorry, this one right here. When you use that EFT button, this is what you'll get for the window to change what country, and this is where you would put in your routing number and your bank account number. And so those are types of things that is a good way to get started with your EFT functionality. Now, if you want to add another layer, you can turn on the email functionality. So with the email functionality turned on for the purchasing side, for the remittance, you can also mark, while you're in there updating your vendors for EFT information, you can go through and mark your option to send a vendor remittance. And the AP remittance format is basically what message would be sent out. So in that process, you'll get a message that here's the format of the email message, and these can be customized as well to make it more, I guess, more personal in a way. Sorry, I clicked the wrong one. But anyway, you can go through and you can have whatever verbiage you want here. You can also add little hooks in here that have the document date or a check total. And those can be added to the email message setup, so it can be more of a personal email customized. This will be sent out, and the attachment will be the check remittance. And these check remittances are Word documents, and you can add a logo. You can obviously it'll have your company name, and it'll have the payment information here. So this is what I was talking about with the EFT batch. So when you are ready to prepare a batch for payments, instead of choosing the check option, you're going to use the EFT option. You'll need to have the setup done in the checkbook that you'll be using for the EFT as well. So let's kind of review this again. You find out what EFT format your bank will accept. You'll collect all the vendor information and update the vendor card with the vendor's bank, routing number. Of course, you can have the bank name as well, but it's not required. But it is probably useful information to have. You can collect the vendor's email address and put that into the vendor card, and then enable the email remittance option on each of the vendor's card. Next, reach out to us and we can help you with the final setup and do some setup and testing. Usually the banks will require, that you send them a test, make sure that all the information is in there, and they'll usually give you a mock-up version, basically saying what needs to change, and we can help you get those couple of fields changed, and then you'll be ready to go. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is document attachments. Document attachments is a great thing to have when you're working virtually, because if when you enter an invoice and you attach the documents, or you do a journal entry and you attach your backup information, or you do any kind of add a vendor and you want to add the W-9 information or other information that you need to use a vendor. Same thing with customers, sales order. You can basically use attachments on all the master records and most of the transaction screens throughout GP, depending on what version. Obviously, the later versions have more options available for you, but you can basically you can attach PDF, Word documents, Excel documents, and then you can attach multiple documents to one master record or transaction. It doesn't just one or two. It does support many. Now, one thing to consider is that it does, which is nice, it keeps that data within the database. So PDF files are one of the smallest space-wise, so that may be something you might want to consider. If you're going to use document attachments, you want to have plenty of space on your server for your databases to hold these documents. You can easily view the attachments that are the documents that are attached, and then as I mentioned, it stores the database in the data in the documents in the database rather than in an external location like previous versions did. So you don't have a chance of losing them as or something getting moved, but they're basically attached to that transaction. Here are some of the areas that have attachments. You can attach journal entries, bank deposit entries, bank transaction, bank deposit entry zoom. When you drill back on a transaction that has had an attachment at the transaction level, you can drill back into it and see the attachment. And that's what makes it so much more efficient when you're working remotely, is you don't have to get up and go to a file cabinet and find these documents. Sales, we have customers, customer cards, sales transactions, sales item detail, receivables transactions, vendor cards, purchase requisitions, purchase orders, purchasing invoices, receivables transactions, payables, vendor approval. And there's just so many different places that you can attach documents. In the company, there's an area where you can make some decisions about how you want the setup of these document attachments to work, and how, if you want to be able to delete them. You can also put passwords, so that a user would need to enter a password to delete the attachment. Inquiry, if you wanted to. I usually always turn on allow attachments to be added to inquiry windows because I feel like that's where it's mostly used. Sometimes after the fact, that's where you want to look things up. You can also have attachments flow from the master records to the transaction or item maintenance. I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong button. So you can have things flow from a vendor to like a payables transaction, or from a sales, from the customer to a sales transaction. Same thing with item maintenance, that type of thing. So you can have things flow, and you can also add attributes, basically labels, to your attached documents so that you can categorize them. So this is what it looks like when you attach a document. You click the attach button, and you can browse to the document. So basically, you click this button down here, that's the attach button, and then you can browse out like you would with any other document on your local computer, or anywhere on the network, and click the attach button. And then it'll attach this, like in this case, I have an Excel file attached. And then if you have a scanner that uses WAI, Windows Image Acquisition technology, sometimes that will be, if that's in your network and it recognizes it, this scan button will be available, and then you can click it and basically browse to the scanner in your network and pick an image or a document from there. You can delete the documents, but it moves it over to a deleted tab so that it doesn't really permanently delete it. So in case you needed to go back and see maybe a prior version of the document that you had added previously, you can kind of keep the most current one on the active page and then move some of the older documents, that were prior, just to record the history of the documents that were attached. When you add the attributes on that first page, you have the ability to press this little button next to the item that you have attached, and then put in descriptions. If you had a name for that attribute, you could basically put in different descriptions for this. You also want to make sure that the send email attachments and email is marked, because that will help work with workflow that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So that's an important piece to have turned on. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is working virtually with the GP workflow. There are two ways to work with GP workflows in your organization. You can have the approvals be made within Great Plains. It will also email a message to the approver, and they can either log into Great Plains if they're a GP user and go through and do the approval that way. If they are not a GP user, you can also enable the workflow to use email actions, in that a user that's outside of Great Plains could open up their email and would have options on their email message to approve it, reject it, or delegate it. And approving via emails would make the process more efficient if the approvers are not GP users, which is usually the case. Most of the people are outside of the accounting department that are going to be approving the transactions and documents. Here's a couple of areas that you can use. You can add the workflow in GP. So in the financial side, you've got the general ledger, accounts, batches, receiving batches, sales transactions, payables batches, payables transactions, purchase orders, and invoices. Those are the kind of areas that you may want to focus on working in a virtual environment like we are in with this COVID-19 pandemic. Vendor approvals, that type of things. Those are the types of things that, you know, are important to keep an eye on while, you know, we're in this particular situation and we're not close to each other, so we can manually approve things. We've got documents attached, and we've got approval processes. There's also payroll areas, payroll employees and skills, payroll direct deposit, time cards, W-4s, expense reports and timesheets and project. And then on the administration side, there's the security roles and security tasks as well for adding new users, that type of thing, as well as the Smart List Designer view. When you use approvals via email, when you choose that option, the approval will receive an email, and they can see information about the document that they're approving by adding some of these detailed information can be added in the setup of the email message so that the approver can see as much information as they might need to be able to approve it. Like in this particular case, it's a purchase requisition, so that would have item number, that type of information. So some of the messages you can include line item details. You can see the comments from the requester. And then in the case of like a batch approval, it'll include a Word version of the edit list for that batch. And then also the approvals you can have attachments that are added to the transaction or the master records. The next item I wanted to talk about would be using one of our ISV partners, McCorma, and they have the ability to, they have a product that will help you print more secure AP checks. So if you are printing AP checks and you actually need to have a paper check, besides using the EFT functionality, you can also, you know, look into the into McCorma. Their product over the years has been called Micker for Payables, but now it's changed to Payment Hub, and it has a lot of additional features that can help when you're printing checks. So one of the reasons why we recommend this is that it prints the signatures on the AP check. So if you have someone that is not available to sign your checks physically, then you can take an image of the signer's signature and set it up to where it can be printed on the check. And you can apply different thresholds, like lower thresholds and higher thresholds. So you can have this approver in this particular sample. I set this approver up to be amounts below the higher threshold. So the higher threshold is $10,000. So this signature would print on any of the checks that are under $10,000. Now, if I want to have another signature over that, I can change this from when to print for any amounts over the $10,000, and I can assign another signature there. In this particular sample, what I did is I made it to where the signature lines on the check will print, not the actual image, but the lines will print when it's below the higher threshold or higher above the higher threshold, so that when I print this, hopefully my signature will print, as well as a line for the next signature to physically be signed. So it can work in a lot of different situations. You can also have passwords assigned, so that even if the signature is going to be used, someone would have to come in and type in the password to allow the user to print that password. So, in these particular times, it may not be, feasible for someone to type in passwords or physically sign, but you can have things set up this way so that you can have, along with the approval process on the front end, by the time you get to the check printing, you can go ahead and have the signatures automatically print on the checks. Here is a sample of what the check kind of looks like on the right, and you see I put my signature on the line, and of course in this case you would have your company name and your check information, and have all of that print on the check itself along with the signature. What's nice about them is it uses blank check stock. There's nothing on the check stock. You just buy the blank check stock and you can use it. It's really great for having multiple companies. So if you're trying to manage 5 or 6 different companies within Great Plains and you have to keep the stock of the checks up, you can always use this option for that too. You'll need magnetic ink cartridges for your printers so that when it prints the micro line and it's read by the bank, then it'll get picked up as it won't basically fail at the bank. So that is something you have to take into consideration, is that there are some magnetic ink cartridges you would need to purchase for your printers. It also has an option of a Z-fold check as well as other formats. And I mentioned the Z-fold check because, I've seen a Z-fold printer being used in an environment with a Z-fold check format, and it basically prints the check, folds it all up, puts the address on the outside of it, and it's basically ready to run through the postage stamp or postage machine and mail. So it makes it stuffing, and it eliminates the stuffing of the envelopes and things like that. And then one thing that we definitely recommend is that if you're changing to the McCorma format, you want to basically set up your format and then send test checks to the bank before you switch. The bank needs to usually have probably at least 10 is what I've seen happen, at least 10 sample checks, and McCorma makes it real easy to print sample checks that can be sent to the bank, and they can be approved and make sure they run through the machine properly, and that if there's any adjustments that need to be made, they'll indicate that, and then you can come back and make your adjustments to the format before they actually go live. So that pretty much concludes my working with EFT. Working virtually with GP. And does anybody have any questions?
All right, thanks, Marie. Once again, if anybody has questions, please enter your question into the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll give a minute here. All right, we have one here from Tracy. Can you use EFTs to manage EFT payments to utilities without actually using them to withdraw from the bank?
I'm not sure if I understand that.
Use EFTs to manage
Utilities.
without actually using them to withdraw from the bank. To manage the transfers without actually withdrawing?
So basically to record, I guess I'm wondering if she means recording the EFT transactions in a batch, but not necessarily sending the file to the bank. Yeah, you could do that, definitely.
Yes, in a batch, she said.
Yes. Yep, you could do that. And it would just create a file, a format. I mean, that really wouldn't make a difference. But yes, you could use that process to show those payments as paid via EFT, for sure.
Okay, great. Could you explain how you would do that?
Well, I think it would be the same type of thing as if you were building a payment batch. You would have to have the vendor, part of the vendor options turned on. You wouldn't necessarily have to have their routing numbers, but you would have to have the option for EFT United States turned on. And then you would basically, and kind of set it up in the, you'd partially set it up in the vendor in the checkbook. And then you basically do a check run like you typically would do, but instead of when you're building your batch, you would choose the EFT as the option and choose the vendors that you want to pay, like your utilities, and then process it. It just would produce a file that you really wouldn't use, but it should mark all of the payments, all the vendors' invoices as paid.
Just without routing numbers included? Right. Okay.
So you'd basically be using the EFT, I'm air quoting, check printing process, just to record all of the payments that are paid via EFT. You could also do that as a recurring batch too, if you wanted to do it that way.
All right, great. Do we have any more questions from the group here? Oh, we do have one from Angela. If a vendor is set up for EFT, can they still receive a check, or does it have to be one or the other?
Actually, they can. So what it's driven by the remit to address. So you could actually have two addresses. One could be used for EFT, and one could be for an actual paper check. And what you would do is when you're entering the transaction, you would be sure and pick which remit to address on that transaction is the one that you want to use, whether it's the EFT or the remit to address that's a physical address. So you could actually name the address IDs EFT or address, and then when you're entering the transaction, choose the correct remit to address.
All right, great. If there are no additional questions here, I'd like to thank you all for attending. Thanks so much, Marie, for a great overview of working virtually with GP. We hope to see you all attend our next session here. And if you'd like to submit for CPE credit, please complete the survey provided after this session. It will also be included in the follow-up email. Quick correction, you can earn 1 credit per session attended today, up to 5 credits total. Please reach out to us-marketing@columbusglobal.com with any further questions. That concludes the breakout session. Thanks again. We'll take a short break here and we'll see you again at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific for a look at how GP users can start getting value from Azure.